another edition of Mississippi Stories. I'm your host, Marshall Ramsey, editor-at-large and editorial cartoonist for Mississippi Today. Had to think about that for a second. It's a little bit early, and I don't have enough caffeine in me. You ought to know her. If you don't, you hadn't been reading Mississippi Today, and you hadn't been reading pretty much all the other national publications because she's a rock star. We have Anna Wolfe with us today, who, of course, busted the TANF scandal wide open, and but you have created quite a body of work in your very, I guess, short career here in Mississippi, but it's been very impactful. It's just good to be able to sit down with you and talk to you. You and I have caught up with each other a couple times in the newsroom and talked about why Mississippi and why we do what we do and why we do here. And one thing about you, and before I'll let you talk, of course, is that we did an event at Fondren Guitars, and you were up speaking, talking about the people that you covered. And it was a very emotional speech, and it made me, I think that was the point when I realized that your work is truly driven by your heart, which that's a really nice compliment and says a lot about who you are.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, and that's the last compliment. No, I'm just kidding. It has been fun to work with you. We've worked together a couple different places, and you know, obviously the TANF scandal, the Back Channel series has had a huge impact, but then again, there's still so much more to do, right?
Right.
Yeah.
So much more work to do.
Yeah. Well, you know, and I promised you would not do the Spider-Man origin story that's been told 6,000 times. You know, I'm from Atlanta originally. I came here from San Diego. I kept walking into automatic opening doors because everything seemed to be a little bit slower here. I thought I'd be here a couple of years. You're from Washington originally. You came here to school and stuck around and saw a lot of need and have been really kind of doing the work.
Yeah, that's right. Mississippi State is not like the most obvious choice for school for a girl from Tacoma, Washington, but you know, I've kind of found my place here.
Yeah, definitely. It's funny because when I applied for this job, I also applied for the Tacoma job. Yeah.
The News Tribune?
Yeah. Could have almost ended up there. So it's just kind of funny how when I first met you, I was like, oh yeah, we could have been neighbors. But when you started out as a reporter, you started with the Clarion Ledger, you were covering the health beat, and it's so interesting how the people that you were covering, where the stories and everything seemed to really crisscross with poverty, how health and poverty is such a tight connection between that. So it was a pretty easy and natural transition to move into this beat.
Yeah, I mean, I really chose this beat. There hadn't been a reporter specifically tasked with reporting on poverty like in the recent future, if ever, in Mississippi.
Why? Because that's like one of the things that drives nearly everything in our state.
I mean, I think it's always thought of as like sort of a secondary topic to whatever you're reporting on, and that was certainly the case with health, that I kept finding that the people that I was interviewing, you know, at the root of like the health issues and just other, you know, issues that they were dealing with was this poverty question, this like sort of economic inequality in the state. And so I actually came over to talk with the editor at Mississippi Today at the time, was Ryan Nave, and kind of like wrote out a beat, you know, plan of covering poverty. And I actually called it the opportunity beat because I really feel like we're in an opportunity desert here, you know, as much as any other kind of desert. And so I was, you know, kind of really passionate about reporting on this area, and I felt like it was such a you know, it was an area that had not really gotten a lot of attention. And I really came in with my first task was, I'm going to figure out what's going on with these public assistance programs, particularly TANF, because I knew from my work at the Ledger that, you know, that program was not operating the way it should be. It wasn't serving people. People weren't able to get the assistance through the program. And I remember coming in at Mississippi Today, and I wrote like this long email to Ryan, like, I am investigating the state's TANF program. And that's kind of how I started on this journey. You
pinned that on that tweet on the top of your Twitter, talking a little bit about how, and that's one thing I really admire about your reporting style, is that you're just very dogged when it comes to digging through numbers and requests and everything else. And you also have an uncanny gift of being able to make connections between one thing over here and then 4 months down the road somebody will say something and you'll go, aha. You did that recently with Brett Favre, for instance. He had texted he didn't do one thing, and then you're like, oh, wait a minute, I think he did do that.
I thought you said, yeah, exactly.
So, but it's amazing how that's so much on that. the TANF program itself, I mean, literally, I think went off the rails when they turned it into block grant all those years ago. And it's almost turned into just kind of a slush fund
Absolutely.
for whoever. And it's not, I mean, this has gone back years, but it seems like this was, I mean, obviously it was very egregious, the things that were, you know, for things that were so far off the
Right.
beaten path for what it was supposed to go for.
Yeah, I mean, I think that people's ideas about what constitutes an anti-poverty program got really distorted over time, you know,
Yeah.
kind of like a game of telephone. You know, in the beginning, the program was created in '96, and I mean, I'll tell you, like, the scandal that we know about took place between 2016 and 2020.
Right.
But that's not all, you know, that doesn't cover all of the, you know, sort of misguided spending that occurred under this program since its beginning in '96. I mean, I think that they really like hit the ground running with, we're gonna get people off of welfare rolls. And that was part of the point of the
Right.
program. And instead use the money on things that sort of promote our ideology about how people should behave and what their, you know, cause of poverty is. So back in like the early 2000s, there was a poster, a billboard that they paid for of like a man laying in bed next to a deer head. And it was like, it said
Isn't
like,
that from The Godfather?
it was like making the point of like, you know, you should be at home with your family instead of like out hunting.
Oh, wow.
Kind of like this, it was under the fatherhood
See, those are
initiative.
fighting words right there.
It was kind of like, you know, will that deer help you sleep at night or something like that. And just kind of a bizarre thing, right? And but that was sort of a perfect example of, you know, how they were, how they had like changed the intent of the program, and that was part of their fatherhood initiative that they were, you know, funding. So it goes back much further than just this time period that we've been focused on.
I'll have to dig that up and show that to my wife and say, hey, look, I own deer hunts. So see, I'm all good. But, you know, it's amazing when you look at the TANF specific, in our state too, and like I said, we'll really dig into some of this, but you look at it nationally too, and it's not just us. I mean, it's amazing. New York Times had a really good article on, you know, why, you know, we can't seem to get out of our own way when it comes to poverty. It's because, like I said, this has gone on since they did that. Now, this isn't the first big thing that you obviously, you're award winning, you've done it for different things, but this was one thing you really wanted to focus on. What was the thing that really tipped you off that made you realize that something was amiss?
Yeah, and I mean, it wasn't, excuse me, it wasn't the idea that there was a bunch of fraud taking place. That was not what I didn't have any indication of that. But I just had read this statistic when I was still at the Ledger that the state was approving less than 2% of people who were applying for cash welfare assistance. And I'm kind of like, well, how in the most poverty-stricken state in the nation are only 2% of people who are applying eligible for it, right? And we get the money anyway every year from the federal government, as you know, through a block grant, almost $90 million a year. And if like, you know, between 5 and 10% of that money is actually going directly to poor families through the welfare check, where's the rest of the money going? And just started filing public records requests trying to get an answer to that question, hitting roadblock after roadblock. You know, the department was actually pretty sophisticated at like sending me things that were not what I asked for, and sort of got me, you know, down the wrong track. But I kept, you know, pushing obviously, and writing stories about how secretive they were being about what they were doing with this money, and talking to the auditor at the time about it and a few employees, and eventually those employees took information to the governor, who turned that over to the auditor, and arrests were made in early 2020. And then the reporting, that's kind of the before the arrests, after the arrests. The reporting after the arrests was just trying to figure out what all had happened, right, and who all was involved.
How did the idea of doing a back channel series come about?
Well, when we had gotten the text messages, we knew that that was going to be like groundbreaking in terms of pushing the story along. And we got them in kind of a trickle. It wasn't like we got everything all at once. And so we kind of were picking out the text messages that we felt like were indicative of, political influence over this welfare program. And I think it was an editor that we were working with who used the term back channel to describe what they were doing, their communication. And, I think just in framing the stories and figuring out, the narratives, we felt like really letting the text messages stand on their own would be the most powerful thing. And I think that readers would agree with that.
Yeah, definitely. The impact of the story. And like I said, last night, I was up in Oxford. I was speaking to a group of students. I asked them, how many of you read Mississippi Today? 80% of them raised their hand. I think a lot of it's been driven by that reporting. I mean, it went from Mississippi Today, a lot of people, they read it and whatever. It went from, oh yeah, I read Mississippi Today. Oh no, I read that story by Anna about that. It was, people suddenly became very specific about what they're reading. And I'm walking out of the restaurant, guy says, hey, look, I love Mississippi. Thank you for what you're doing. I mean, it's just important. You and I both were at the Clarion Ledger, great newspaper, great people that are working hard, that are still there. But from the time I started, there was 100 people in the newsroom. Now there's a handful. When you lose that many investigative journalists, it's like you lose the watchdog. And we've seen what happens in Mississippi if there's nobody watching it. Obviously, what we do here is really important. But talk about a little bit about the impact that you've seen. Of course, obviously, it's like I turn on the TV. It's like, oh yeah, there's Anna. She's on national television again a little bit. Talk about that. I mean, how the impact of this, has it surprised you, or does it discourage you that not more is being done because of it, or how do you feel about it?
Well, speaking to that, I think it is really important to, in like whatever topic you're trying to cover, write stories that are really compelling, like focus on the very compelling elements of these stories. And that's where you've seen the difference between like the beginning of my reporting on this beat was kind of dry, and I'm writing about poverty policy, and I found a way to like bring that to a larger audience through just these like really compelling stories. Like anyone like reading that is going to be intrigued by what's happening in Mississippi. And so it's no surprise, I don't think, that the national media picked up on it in the way that they did in the summer of 2022, when the activity going on was like DHS had just filed this civil suit. So now there's actual court charges against Brett Favre, and then the state fires the attorney who's bringing the suit because he was subpoenaing the athletic foundation and for communication related to the former governor. And then one of the defendants, Nancy New, she alleges that the former governor had directed her to make the payments that she was now facing charges over, and on and on. And so it was really just this progression of events that I think caused more people to take note. And specifically when the text came out that we published for the first time, obviously, of Brett Favre saying, will the media find out about where this money came from and how much, I think was like just really compelled people. For one, we are the media, and so yes, they could find out, and we did, and that's what's happening now. And so I think like the national media has been, and the coverage has been crucial to bringing the story to a national audience. So even though I think that it's happened for the most part because of Brett Favre, I'm just glad that people are paying attention to, deeply entrenched poverty in the South that they might not have otherwise.
Like I said, I watched you speak about your beat and the people that you've covered, and talk about some of the, is there somebody that you can think of that you've covered that that really makes you just get up in the morning and want to do a really good job and really keep working harder?
Well, one person that comes to mind is a woman named Danielle, who I wrote about in December. And she's a very compelling person to me. She's raising 6 kids in South Jackson, and the things that she's dealing with are, I mean, they touch on every single sort of societal issue you can imagine. But she's so resilient, and so, I mean, I think she's like a superstar in her own right, in the way that she's advocated for herself in front of these very powerful systems like the Department of Human Services and, you know, employment security. And, you know, she's just very in tune to, like, she sees what's going on and the system that she, you know, is being victimized by, essentially. And she's just like so strong in the face of all that. So she's kind of the first person that comes to my mind.
That's incredible. Okay, so obviously you don't have a crystal ball, but where does the TANF scandal go from here?
Yeah, I think we're just trying to follow the federal investigators' trail. You know, they've just recently brought charges and got guilty pleas from 2 more individuals, the wrestler Brett DiBiase and another nonprofit founder, Christy Webb. And so I think we're just seeing, you know, like what kind of information they have on the higher ups that they might be able to give over that will lead the, you know, the federal probe further. So we'll see.
The one thing I've always learned about watching federal investigations, A, they're incredibly quiet, and 2, they work their way up. It's like they're working up toward a big, you know, they get somebody to plead, they get more information, and they go up to the next level and the next level. So it will be kind of interesting to see where this goes, to say the least. Congratulations, by the way, on your latest award. Talk about that. I mean, gosh, you're the youngest person now to win it twice.
Right. I mean, I'm kind of just in awe by it.
Yeah.
It was really fun event.
Yeah. I'll tell everybody a little bit about the award, because like I said, it's the top investigative prize for investigative journalism. So it's like your Oscar for what you do.
Yeah, it's the Goldsmith Prize from Harvard, and it's specifically for investigative reporting, and there's just one, you know, it's not different categories. And so the fact that it was such a local paper, you know, was significant.
Because that's always, you know, that used to hurt you in the Pulitzers, for instance. Like, for instance, if you were a cartoonist and did only local cartoons, you probably wouldn't get it unless it was something big. But the fact that you did it, because, well, also too, this is such a big story.
Right. Yeah. I mean, the national implications are enormous. So, but it was nice to get that recognition, of course, and speaks to, like, I think the power of Mississippi Today. Yeah.
Amen. And the work that we're doing, and of course, you're doing great work too. We're going to wrap up here, I guess. Is there anything I haven't covered? Because I obviously need more caffeine.
No, I think it was good.
And this has been great. I think, you know, it's fun to get to work in this newsroom because you and everybody else on the staff is so incredibly just driven to what you're doing, and you're passionate about Mississippi. And you really do seem, but you have a passion for Mississippi because of the people. And just, we're looking right now, and before we wrap, you know, obviously the tornado went up through some of the poorest sections of the state. You know, hit Rolling Fork, hit Silver City, 2 cities that, you know, I think the good Lord's they probably had enough misery in the last, you know, 50 to 100 years. But talk a little bit about that impact, because I mean, that's obviously going to be very difficult for some of the areas to recover after the tornado. So it's like, once again, it'll be interesting to see where all the money that comes in goes, and make sure it goes in the right way. So.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, that's the thing, is that, like, in the case of a natural disaster, people mobilize.
Yeah.
And people are not mobilizing when it's just, you know, systemic poverty that's existed for decades, you know.
It takes almost having to be able to see it and feel it and touch it to be able to attack it. But if it's almost like we're in the water and we're fish in the water and we don't realize that it's you know, polluted a little bit on that. So when it comes to that, but once again, I think the work you're doing is incredibly important, and I appreciate you taking the time today to be able to sit down with us and let people. I mean, they obviously know you because you're on TV about every third day now. So that. About to say, I love doing it. I love watching you on that because you're so good at it now. You know, early on, you were a little nervous, you could tell, but you're like, yeah, how are you this morning? Yeah, it's good to see you again. How are the kids? It's been a couple weeks, and everything. What was probably and we'll wrap with this, what was the most surreal moment that you were just sitting there going, I cannot believe I'm doing this?
Ooh, that's hard. I'm trying to think of like which interview was sort of the biggest one. What would you say was?
Oh, I don't know. I mean, like I said, just seeing you on MSNBC was wild, and then John Oliver talking about you, and it was
that was really cool.
Yeah. Yeah, I had it weird. I had John Oliver talking about you one week, and the next week he's talking about my cousin. So it was just incredible. Yeah, it wasn't friendly about my cousin, but it was still funny to watch.
Sure.
It's like, oh my gosh, I can't believe this is going on. But it's like, wow, I know these people. That's great. But yeah, no, to me, it's just cool because I know how hard you've worked behind the scenes, and this, it's just fun to see you get the recognition you deserve. I think at the end of the day. So yeah, and I'll tell you this: when the Barbara Bush cartoon hit a few years ago, and I was on CNN for 8 minutes, which is like 6 lifetimes.
Yeah,
and it was in a room with nothing but green screen. I had no monitor. I had an IFP.
Wow.
And so I was talking to John Berman, but I knew what he looked like and everything. But I'm just sitting here, this one little tinny voice in my bad ear going, I'm going to embarrass Mississippi. I'm going to embarrass. And then about halfway through the interview, I realized, no, there's been a lot of people before me that have done a lot of hard work. So there's nothing I can do that could be any worse. So, but you have definitely not embarrassed Mississippi. You've made it proud. So
thank you.
Good deal. Hey, thanks. I appreciate you watching. Of course, follow Anna Wolfe's work and all our great journalism at MississippiToday.org. And you can catch up with some past episodes of Mississippi Stories, and make sure you click on the like button too, because we want you to see some past interviews as well, and all the stuff we got coming up in the future. Hey, thanks for watching. We'll be back next week with another great episode, once again, of Mississippi Stories. Thank you for watching this episode of Mississippi Stories. Make sure to subscribe to the Mississippi Today YouTube channel and click the bell to be notified every time a new video uploads.